Hello, everyone. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of this. This is an important discussion that I know myself and the panelists are excited to have. So my name is Amy Volas. And for those that don't know me, I am the founder and CEO of Avenue Talent Partners, where we help startups, varying stages of startups, hire the right enterprise salespeople, sales leaders and executive sales leaders the first time around to avoid the painful, nasty effects of mishiring. And so, when I think about, I was watching Mark Roberge, and what a treat to be following him. When we think about what's next, science and practice, how we think about growth, the timing of it all, it bodes really well for what we're about to dig into today. And that's all about hiring and onboarding. So I think we can all agree interviewing, hiring, onboarding in a fully remote world is a new challenge for many revenue leaders. It's important to have a diverse and agile team that is fully operationalized as quickly as possible. And overshadowing all of this is a global pandemic to boot. So quick fixes, hot takes, LinkedIn influencer hacks, and the like, that's not going to be your saving grace. And so there's a whole lot for us to break down. And we're going to be digging deeper into current hiring and interviewing trends, diversity and inclusion, which is near and dear to all of our hearts, onboarding best practices, and a whole lot more. So without further ado, I think it's important to meet our panelists. And so, Tracy, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to be here. I'm thrilled to be here. And, Hannah, wherever you are in the background dealing with all this Zoom stuff, girl, I feel for you. We've all run events before and had things happen. I'm a lifelong B2B marketer. My very first job was as a sales development rep when I was in high school. And I got the bug for tech marketing very, very early, and also got the bug for getting inside the brain of my sales colleagues. So lots of stories about that, but it's the sales and marketing alignment piece is the thing that I'm the most passionate about. And I'm a CMO at Inside View. I've been there for about 5 years. And there's a whole lot more that'll come out, but in short, that's who I am. And I just want to make one plug for a nonprofit that I'm on the board of that many MSP members are members of too, called Women in Revenue. And we're a nonprofit specifically for helping women network. And it's free to join, and there's lots of programs. I'm really proud of it. There's about 2,500 members right now. So lots of things we could be doing together. And that's me.
Thank you, Tracy. So up next, let's go with Melanie.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to join the panel. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Melanie Graff. I'm currently the Director of Talent Acquisition with a marketing technology company called called Iterable, SaaS product. And I have been in recruiting my whole career, the early years on the agency side, transitioning into executive search, and then made the move to in-house technical recruiting with Google about 10 years ago, and then thereafter with a couple startups. I joined Iterable about 3 years ago, was essentially the first in-house recruiter, which involved me hiring and building the sales and the engineering teams, which was a very interesting experience. Couldn't be more different from one another. And then, we've grown rapidly. I think when I joined, we had about 45 people. We're at about 315 people right now, ideally getting closer to 400 by the end of the fiscal year. And now I lead the team of recruiters and sourcers and RC. So lots of recruiting experience to speak of.
And rounding up the panel, Aaron.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to participating. A little bit about me. I've been selling for about 20 years in the B2B world, most recently with NetSuite, which is an ERP software company. We're a division of Oracle now. And I've had a number of sales leadership jobs with NetSuite, but most recently I've taken on a role managing all of our customer renewals and upsells. And so that's me.
Excellent. So before we dig in, I think it's important to note that we are all humans here on this panel, and we have a whole lot of experience, but none of us have all of the answers. And it's why we're all really excited to be here together, is to break down an important conversation from all of our point of views and experiences. We want to think about this broadly and from our points of view, and what we see is hard, and having difficult conversations, because that's when change happens. So this is a complex topic. We're going to talk about it broadly. And as you have questions from an audience perspective, we want to be here for you as well. Please drop those. We will try to answer as many of those as possible. But let's kick things off here on the topic of diversity, right? Where do you start? Different things are working for some organizations versus other organizations. What kinds of tactical things that can we take away from all this? I mean, it's just, there's so much to think about versus I just want to hire more women in sales, let's say. And so Tracy, let's start with you. I think you've got a whole lot to say on this topic, as we all do, but I'd love to start with you to find out about how are you thinking about this? Where are you starting? What does diversity mean for you in your business and in the things that you're working on?
This is such a big, broad question, and I'm excited to give my take on it because I've been thinking so much about, kind of all these issues. And, if you think about the macro level, I was just thinking as you were talking, Amy, about like what is going on right now. And it's crazy, right? The economy has slowed, but yet there are pockets of growth. So we're all here today because we want to grow our businesses, right? Either get them back to growth or accelerate growth. Then you've got diversity and inclusion as the thing that every company says they want to do. They want to have a program. They want to have more women on their board. They want to, increase diversity in every way you can count that. So that's happening. And then you overlay that with a global pandemic and the racial injustice that's happening in the United States and the Black Lives Matter movement and nationwide protests, right? So all of those things are swirling around at the same time. And we're trying to make note of it. And I'm a very practical person. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. My mom was an ER nurse. My 3 sisters are adopted. 2 of them are Black. 1 of them is gay. So I grew up in this very racially conscious home life. Let's just kind of put it that way if I was going to shorthand it. And then as I entered the workforce, I became very gender conscious. And advanced in my career pretty fast, became a vice president in a $1 billion company when I was 30. So for 24 years now, I have been an executive, either reporting to the CEO or, in that echelon, so to speak. And I've almost always been the only female. Maybe there was one other one, maybe she ran HR. Like Erin and I used to work together 20 years ago at Business Objects. And I was one of like 4 women that were VPs in the entire company. And there were like 60 VPs, right? And so I have that lens. And so when you think about those lenses that you bring to it, what I'm trying to do at Inside View, but also just in the industry, is be very intentional about where to spend time, be intentional about who we partner with for recruiting. SVA is one of the sponsors of this event. We have partnered with them and had great success in bringing in a talent pool that we would normally never have access to. That is one example. Another example would be being intentional about vendors. And one of our vendors is called Televerde, and their employees are women that are incarcerated. And so I have 3 teammates on my SDR team that are all wearing orange jumpsuits and building enterprise pipeline every day. And we could have picked another vendor, right? Easily. There's plenty out there that do a good job with outsourced SDR, but we decided on this one on purpose, right? So those are a couple examples of intentional things. I know Erin had a lot of experience at NetSuite working in a women's program. So I'll pause there, but this is how I'm thinking about it, right? All the swirling big issues, my own personal lens, but then what can I actually practically do in this moment? And, not every company has the same kind of resources, so we have to do what we can.
Well, I think before we get started into the different points of view here, one thing that I think is important to layer on top that I'm having pretty much in every conversation is, let's talk about what the ecosystem looks like from a sales perspective and hiring. So this is US Census Bureau data. This isn't just Amy Bullis talking off the cuff. 78% 78.3, so 78.3% of people in sales are white males. So less than 25% of everybody else. It's like, so when somebody comes my way and they say, I want to hire a VP of sales and I want them to tick off the diversity bucket, the pool that exists there is very, very small. And so I'm challenging and encouraging people, and Melanie, I'm going to love to point this to you, to think about how do you bring people into the organization. We have done a great job of bringing people in and quickly ushering them out of sales, but we're not doing such a great job as an ecosystem of bringing people in, training them, onboarding them, supporting them, growing them. That's how we get that feeder system of a truly diverse group of people. And what's more interesting is McKinsey found that companies in the top 25% for ethnic and racial diversity in management were 35% more likely to have financial returns above their industry average. So this isn't just like a fun thing that we're all talking about because it's all over the news. These are real things, and there are true benefits to thinking broadly and diversely. And diversity isn't necessarily just hiring more women or hiring people of color. What about folks with disabilities, folks coming out of the military, our LGBTQ community? Ageism is real, and the list goes on. So Melanie, to you, where is Iterable with all of this? How are you thinking about it?
Yeah, all of the above, and exactly. I mean, I completely mirror, your thinking in that it's not only, also to Tracy's point, it's sort of like the right thing to do, which we all want to be a part of the right thing to do and be on the right side of history. It's good for business. It is good for the bottom line to have a diverse pool. And diversity is such an interesting topic because it's also, there are all the array that you just described, Amy. Some of it is very private. People do not, and they should not feel obligated to share, personal information about themselves that they don't want to. So the only thing that's really quantifiable if we're collecting data is the EEOC data. So it would be, gender, race, diversity, disability status and military background, which is great, and we love that. But there's so much more to it that we should pursue just because it's good for business and it's the right thing to do. So my brain kind of goes in both directions with that, because we want to quantify, we want to do better. So the only way we can know if we're doing better is to count, and the only people who can be counted are based on self-reporting via EEOC data when they're applying. So it's a really kind of interesting challenge to pursue, to just kind of continue to apply growth mindset, which is a value really held dearly at my company, and to do the right thing. So to answer your question in terms of a tactical standpoint, really fundamental things, that we're working on, which is creating job descriptions that use really inclusive language. We know this is, again, data points all over the place that for example, women are far less likely to apply to roles unless they feel that they, embody something like 90% of the bullet points listed on that job description. So just using, more open, more inclusive language, having a company website, a careers page that illustrates a genuine pursuit of diversity and inclusion and equity and belonging at the company. So, things that we have some control over. Another thing that, for my efforts is more about building community, more outreach, more utilizing resources where we might be able to attract people who otherwise might not know about our company. So it's just more about expansion and exposure and being, sort of open and welcoming and making sure that that's all very clear on all of the materials connected to our company. And then, the presumption that good things will follow. And I have to say, from a data collection standpoint, I am seeing that at Iterable with all these various kind of efforts that we're making. It all amounts to something bigger. And again, getting back to the growth mindset, value, my thinking and those around me is we can always do it better. Okay, this is fine, but what's next? What's next? And to keep, you mentioned this, Amy, nobody's doing this perfectly. Everybody wants to, but we can do it in steps and always try to better where we are today.
And I'll just add to that before, Erin, we talk with you about what you're doing organizationally, but when it comes to writing job descriptions, there are a few things that come top of mind that could be helpful to anybody that's joining us today or listening to this after the fact. Tap Recruit, Textio, and if you Google, I don't have the link, and I'm sure MSP will be lovely to get it from me and include it in perhaps a follow-up, but there's a free gender decoder tool that you can use for your job description. So just trying to be actionable here as we think about things that you can do. So Erin, I'm going to bring you into the mix here in terms of what you're doing organizationally in such a larger scale, right? NetSuite's a huge company. So really curious to hear your take on this.
Sure. So we've done a number of things. So I think to answer your question, where do you start? I think the first thing that we've seen some good traction with, or I have anyways, in trying to affect some change on this, has been to approach it from a lens of what it's going to do to make the business more productive, as well as just the right thing to do. And I think that first part gets lost actually a lot and really needs to be a part of it. Otherwise, it just tends to die on the vine. So that's one. Two is we've had really some good traction starting at the beginning, so to speak, with respect to our talent funnel and who we recruit, which is largely from college graduates. And by looking deliberately at which colleges we targeted, we quickly found that we mostly targeted more affluent, predominantly white schools. And that really was a missed business opportunity. And so we've since really pivoted that dramatically and include a number of historically Black colleges now, a much more diverse range of colleges. And that's a huge part of the input of our funnel. And that's been going for a couple of years now and has really actually changed the mix positively for our, call it entry-level BDRs and reps now. But where we have a lot of room to improve is on the mentoring and development and promotion of all underrepresented communities, but particularly people of color. And so in that respect, we've recently instituted a mentoring program. In researching various ways to be a good ally, I've discovered that that's a really key component. And so we've set up a mentoring program directly for people of color. It's modeled after something we did called Women in NetSuite, which was focused on female leadership and was quite successful. And then we've also tried to scale out some grassroots initiatives that have been going on. There's an event called, or an initiative called Diversity in Tech, which has been happening, organized by some BDRs and reps just locally to talk about this topic and help try to get what they needed to improve diversity. So I've been an executive sponsor to scale that out across 10 cities. So those are a number of things that we've done to actually take action and hopefully make a difference on this topic.
I love it. So then, you know, the word tension comes up a lot when it comes to this topic, and there's a lot to break down. So I think, again, we're all trying to do the best that we can, and we're trying to influence change. And at the end of the day, when you think about how to influence change, and I think about your role, Mel, from a talent acquisition perspective, the decision isn't yours when it comes to making a hire. Mm-hmm. So how are you dealing with that in your business? Your intentions are good. You want to see this change, but ultimately you can lead the horse to water. You can't make them drink. How are you solving for that? What's working?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a couple things regarding that issue. You know, I have to say that I mean, maybe for lack of a better word, as chaotic as current events are right now, in that regard, you know, I and my team have been able to sort of use the times to our advantage. You know, people, there is an awakening, and people, you know, are starting to see that, you know, we have huge systemic problems and we have micro problems, and we can have some impact on the micro issues. And so those kind of what I call like nudge conversations that I have had and that my team members have you know, fallen on very open ears. You know, and it's always helpful to use data, something to the effect of like, did you know, if we pursue this candidate rather than that candidate, the outcome for your team would result in, you know, XY growth of whatever. And everybody's in agreement that that's a good thing. So just, you know, a little bit more kind of overt conversation, not forcing anyone to do anything, but also taking, retaining the reins, I think, a little bit longer than perhaps we might have previously, and just, very open conversation, data driven, and just being very thorough in drawing the full picture of what this could mean, so that's, one of the strategies that we implement, because once again, kind of going back to that theme, it's the right thing to do. People need to be informed. They need to be educated. Looks like Tracy has a point.
Yeah, I mean, you're making me jump out of my chair, Melanie, as you're saying this, because I've been in multiple conversations, even very recently, with senior executives who say, we really want to fill in the blank woman for this role of CMO. But, of course, we're going to pick the best candidate, though, and we might not have enough of the women. And what goes through my brain is I kind of used to believe that, right? When I was in the lens where I was the only one in the room. But now that I'm part of a panel like this, as an example, or part of Women in Revenue, where there's 25 freaking 100 women, half of them are director or VP people, right? There are plenty of executives that are female. So just in terms of that, real thing, that real conversation that happens all the time. And I'm guessing that you guys in recruiting, and Amy, with you and your clients, that must come up. Like, we want a woman, but so how do you handle that? Like, it's infuriating.
There's this thing, you might all know about it, called the Rooney Rule, which is like, okay, we can't make a hire until we, put other sort of diverse people through an interview process. And that also, it's just not effective, right? It just becomes a box that's checked. It's really more about, thinking very holistically, that is the only way to do this, using data, and also hiring patiently, and everybody is on the same page about it. This is what we're doing. This is a key critical hire, and this is what we're doing. So it's not about like, okay, go ahead and hire this person now because you check the box of like our rules. That's just not going to cut it anymore. So it's repeat conversations, repeat education, and again, having the ability to kind of utilize the times we're in, and knowing these are uncomfortable conversations. We're not going to tiptoe around them anymore. We're going to be more overt, more direct.
Well, we're talking about experienced hiring, right? So Tracy, unpopular opinion to add on to this is, yes, there are plenty of women, but I deal with startups, and there aren't a lot of women in startups in sales leadership. And so I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the ecosystem. And that's, I'm dying here, and I'm moderating, so I'm going to just put this here and then turn it over to Erin. But one of the things that people can do that are listening, that care about what we're talking about, or want something tangible or tactical to take away, I didn't create it, but I sure do use it. And it's amazing to see what happens when you really lean in, is the power of a scorecard. It seems to take away some of that emotion, some of that bias, and it really holds the hiring committee, not just the person, accountable. And it can still create efficiency, because people, especially startups, want to hire yesterday, but it's holding everybody and anchoring everyone to a common denominator of, what do we define the right person to be for this role? And it has nothing to do with anything but what we need. And putting people through that, it's amazing how much more fair and balanced it becomes. So Erin, I've got to loop you in here. Again, sort of comparing, contrasting from a ginormous company like NetSuite that's now part of Oracle. How are you thinking about this?
Well, we've not yet moved to a scorecard approach with respect to hiring.
Talk to me. I'll tell you all about it.
No, we probably should. But what we've really just started on doing really is taking a more deliberate approach to ensuring, I guess, our own version of the Rooney Rule a little bit with respect to hires, to make sure that we're at least evaluating all different types of candidates and then making the right business decision. But I fully admit that it's certainly not perfect. And we've got a lot of room to grow there. And yeah, I mean, but it is my hope. I mean, I do look back at where we were with female leaders. I think there's a whole thing. I mean, with a bigger company, maybe the perspective I can add is to this audience is there is something to be said for actively providing, once you have diverse and underrepresented communities in your sales force, actually being proactive about giving them opportunities to shine from a leadership perspective. And we did that with a focus on the female community 3 or 4 years ago. And at the time, Tracy, was very much like when we worked at Business Objects, and it was all white dudes. And now we're much better represented from a female leadership perspective in particular, which is great. And we've got a whole generation now of really strong female leaders at, mid to senior levels of the sales leadership chain. Still have a long ways to go, but it's gone in the right direction. And that was accomplished through just making sure that we had programs that were positive towards the business, helped us develop and close business, but run by females, focused on females, and allowed them to show what they could do and put them in a position to succeed, and provided support for that. And I think that was really helpful, so we're hoping to emulate that with some of the other underrepresented communities in our group.
So Tracy, one thing that I want to pull you back in, because for anybody that is joining us, we've had 2 calls leading up to this. And yesterday's call was really spirited. It was chock full of all sorts of insight. And if anybody sees me looking over, I made a bunch of notes because there's certain things that I really want to make sure we call out. Tracy, let's go back to the scorecard. You had such brilliant wisdom on this yesterday about the language used on a scorecard and kind of the rules of engagement. Can you talk more about that without putting words in your mouth?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we in my marketing team, the SDR, Sales Development Group, reports to me, and the leader, Kelsey Eriks, and I were just about to embark on a massive hiring. And it was very competitive for talent, period of time. It was about a year and a half ago. And we needed to hire several people, somewhere between 6 and 8 all at one time. And we had maybe 30 candidates that we were going to be getting from SVA all at one time. So we're like, oh crap, I'm going to forget, first of all, like one conversation to the next. And I'm always very involved in that interview process. So we built what we seriously called it the Poor Girls Scorecard. After the joke of the poor man, right? So the Poor Girl Scorecard, and we just put it in a Google Sheet. Now, since that time, our HR team has actually instrumented a hiring and recruiting scorecarding system. But back then, it was just a Google Sheet, and we had every candidate's picture on it because I'm very visual. I can't remember, one Mary to another Mary, right? It's like, wait, which one was she? And we just had, I think it was like 9 things, and some were skills and some were traits. And traits would be things like curiosity, poise, critical thinking, resilience or grit, and eagerness. And we had behavioral questions that would help us figure out those things, right? And, you can tell a lot about if someone's curious when you ask them, what's your favorite book that you've read? Or tell me what you do outside of work. Like, you can identify if someone's curious or not. And that's an important trait when you are coming into a company. And then on the skills side, there were some basic things, but we knew that they had the training that they needed to become an SDR. So we didn't have to measure, do you know how to use a CRM or anything like that? Because we knew that was coming. What that allowed us to do with a hiring team of 3 or 4 people was go through a bunch of folks really fast and quickly get to the ones that we most wanted to make an offer to. And we've been able to do that now in a 2-week period, from the start of opening the recs to the offers being accepted, which is unbelievable to me, that anything could ever go so fast. And then you bring in this cohort all at the same time. So, I think being very thoughtful, and you Amy, you talked about a couple free tools you can use to kind of take some of the words out that don't attract certain people. So for example, one of the ones I know is very true is that if a female sees a job description that says rock star, meat eater, hunter, she's just not going to even be interested, typically, right, as an example. There's also, ageism words and other things that, you just need to make sure that you maintain your authentic voice. Don't water it down so much that that everything becomes meaningless. Be the voice of the company. And it sounds like, Melanie, your company has done a lot of work on how you want to appear to the market. And I think that is really smart. You end up with a good style guide then to use.
So a question came up from the audience, and before we get to that from Eric Bryan, I will just say on the scorecard front, because I've written about it, I have one that I've created that's really in depth. The one thing I would encourage people not to do is put pictures in there, because if you're dealing with a hiring manager that is biased, that's going to potentially, or ageist, or whatever the case may be, that's going to potentially automatically disqualify that person and find the reasons why versus the reasons why not versus the reasons why. So Mel, this question I think is good for you. Eric Bryan asks us, how should we look to address diversity bubbles within the company? For example, many companies have achieved or are approaching equal gender representation overall, but when digging deeper, notice that they're concentrated in specific teams, usually not sales, and not present in many leadership roles.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That is definitely true. Couple things. Well, first of all, just to touch on the scorecard issue, I completely agree. We have a scorecard set up for every level of interviewing, and for the on-site, this is determined long before we even go into the interview process. Let's talk through some open-ended questions that we're going to use repeatedly that address both skills and values alignment. Provide the hiring manager perhaps with a menu of questions, and then they sort of get in the groove of it all, and sometimes can create their own. But so that there's consistency, that the questions are well thought out, they are open-ended, and they're fair to get to the heart of who this person is and the talent that he or she or they can bring to the role. And then after each on-site interview, we have a debrief, so we talk it through in a round-robin setting to really. If there's any differing of opinions based on scorecards, that it can be settled and we can determine a yay or a nay. So I think, you have to have a process, and it has to be something that you're really well prepared for, and that it's consistent across the board so you can make the right hiring decisions. So with regard to these bubbles, I agree. We see that even in my current company, we're looking to make improvements. We are once again, doing more in the way of partnering with other companies that might lead us to surfacing folks that we wouldn't have found otherwise. Like, we have a partnership with a company that helps veterans go, either active or ex-military, make the transition into a corporate environment. That's just one example of the partnerships that we have and events that we are either sponsoring or hosting ourselves, plus all sorts of resources that we're using. We're spending money. We're spending money to do more, to cast a wider net, and again, for us to build relationships with communities we might not otherwise, to try to solve that problem. And as far as referrals, I mean, something like a huge percentage of my current company have joined based on being referred by somebody else at the company, which is great. I mean, that means that people really feel good about working there. That's a very good sign. But we're asking people to go broader and deeper and be more, more thoughtful about their own networks. And, how can we be introduced to people that they may have in their networks that are not immediate, therefore not exactly, sort of like who we normally would bring in, which is people who are similar to our current team. So we're asking people to be more thoughtful and go more deeply in that regard also. And again, that sort of concept of hiring patiently, that we're all on the same page about this, and what can we do to make some improvements? So it's iterative to make improvements.
Well, and there's so much to cover here.
Yeah.
That I want to make sure that we get to as much as we can get to. And so what we've got less than 20 minutes left. Onboarding is its own beast in and of itself. And I feel like every one of these slides can be an hour-plus long conversation. We all talked about that yesterday. Erin, I want you to talk about this, right? Like, how are you thinking about ensuring not just that you get the right people coming through, but that you're setting them up for success for the long haul. What are you doing when it comes to transitioning to your work environment?
Yeah, this is a good one. We've struggled with this because, as I said earlier, we had some good initial traction changing the diversity of the input of our talent funnel by targeting a more diverse set of colleges. But then we quickly learned that our organization is not very good at being equitable, at looking at diversity and inclusion when hiring and promoting, and not good at making people feel included. It was pretty eye-opening to hear some of this feedback that's been coming recently. We've had some notable turnover of people of color in particular who just said they didn't feel included. We had people get told that the reason they weren't promoted is that they weren't a culture fit, which even recently might not have been such an crazy thing to say, but definitely now is getting looked at closely as it should. And so, you know, this is a very recent development for us. So basically we suck at it. And we have tried to, this is where the mentoring program I mentioned sort of came out of. This is where expanding the diversity in tech initiative has come out of. And those are the only two real programs that we have to try and be more deliberate about promoting a more diverse and inclusive culture. We do fortunately have within the Oracle umbrella just an enormous wealth of information. I shouldn't say that's the only thing, because Oracle does have a lot of training that we've been pushing, which is micro inequity training, for example, unconscious bias training. These are eye-opening things for me and for a lot of people of my generation. So those are things we've done to try and move this needle, but it's hard. We're not good at it.
Are you getting resistance, Aaron? So when you're thinking about it, so, you know, first and foremost, it's hard to admit that you're not nailing it out loud, right? Like that you're losing people of color. And
Right.
that's hard to say that out loud. As you try to bridge that gap internally as an executive leader within the company, what are some of the things that you're doing to open conversation and keep the conversation going? Because that is hard.
Well, I think that for me, there have been protests and there have been demonstrations before, but for me this time, what's different this time around, I think have been people of represented groups, i.e. white males, and other more represented groups participating more in trying to solve the problem. And I count myself in that bucket, but then also there's a big group of people at NetSuite who want to help. So for me, I've just been trying to do some stuff and get some stuff off the ground. And that's what those programs are about. Resistance, I wouldn't say there's been a lot. There's definitely a generation gap though. I mean, there's a huge, I don't know. This is when I knew I was old. I was like, I found like the generation in our BDR class they're speaking a whole nother language on this topic, you know? And so, I mean, I always consider myself a progressive person, but then I started looking into this and realized how behind I was on all these topics. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's resistance as much as a lack of just knowledge and just a generation gap that's out there that can slow these things down.
So I want to make sure that we get as many questions answered as possible. So as we're talking about hiring and onboarding and tension, for anyone that's joining us, drop your questions. I want to make sure that we get to those. We've got about 10 minutes left, a little less than, and this is all really important. So while we're waiting for questions to come through, Tracy, I want to loop you into this because thinking about how to get people into their first job, right? And it dovetails off of what you're talking about, Erin, where, you know, it's a different language, or it's not that it's um, there's different complexities because who you are versus where they are, there's a generational gap there. So Tracy, when you think about it for Inside View and hiring SDRs or entry-level sales folk into the company, how are you thinking about that from getting people into the company, establishing that feeder system, and then onboarding them so that they stick around?
Yeah, we have a very good rhythm going now where our SDRs are either part of the Televerde team that I talked about. Those women tend to do a great job with our enterprise customers. They're in prison for many years. They're working with us for many years. The relationship goes on for many years. Let's be blunt. That's how it works. For everybody else, we're hiring strictly from SB Academy now. Newer organization that I had never even really would understood would be there to get folks, you know, and Raheem Fazal, we'll talk about this later on. I know he has an open mic section. He's talked about putting 1 million people to work in tech from non-traditional tech backgrounds. So 60% of their fellows, they call them, are first generation college grads. Like that's a huge, huge thing. You know, and not to mention diverse in every other way you'd ever want to measure, you know, that number. So we've made the conscious choice that, okay, our sales development reps are going to be employees, are going to come from there. We have this rhythm, we have our scorecard, we know how to bring them in, we know what they know when we hire them. And then our leader, you know, puts them through the ropes, and there's a playbook, you know, just like the morning speaker was talking about. You know, you want to have a playbook that you can follow that's repeatable. And we really do a lot of mentoring across the team. And Erin, earlier when you were talking about the generational gap, I just wanted to make one suggestion to the audience, which is working so well for me, which is bonding over music. Because the other day, I'm not kidding, before we shut down, I was working late. And, you know, it was like 7 o'clock, and I just like bust out Biggie Smalls and Eminem and all of this music that I graduated from high school in 1988, Prince, Purple Rain, right? And so I'm rocking out to this music, and a bunch of my SDRs were working late, and they were like, my mom plays that. And I was like, oh my God, like this is the moment, right? Like this is what we can bond over. And then, you know, you start trading music. It's just a small little thing, but it really, really, really works, you guys. So, you know, figuring out where to meet people in terms of their interests is another really important one. And it doesn't have to be interest related to the thing that makes them not like the others, right? It could be gardening. Like I'm a huge gardener, and so I've started a little gardening club with everybody. Like that kind of thing, I think makes people want to stay, but also open conversation. You can't pretend that we're not all white on this panel, right? We are. That's how it worked. You know, next time around, I bet you that you'll see a different looking panel. So we have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations and just very conscious about what we do.
It's a great point. I'm mentoring a woman that's just really coming into her sales career. She's African American, and she asked me to mentor her, and we had a conversation yesterday. So this is super top of mind. And she said, you know, the sales culture is not what I want it to be. And I challenged her to say, what are you trying to do to think about being part of that change? And she just sort of looked at me for a second and said, I haven't thought about it that way. And so one thing that I will say is, how are we, and Mel, I want you to think about this as I'm teeing it up. We didn't talk about it yesterday, so welcome to the zinger. But how are we enabling our employees, whether they're just coming in or they are senior executives, to have a voice, to come up with creative ideas? Because especially for sales culture, and the white bro culture is very much a real thing, it turns people off, it turns people out. And I love that you're talking about the gardening club or music or whatever it might be. And she and I talked about starting a book club or things along those lines. But Mel, how are you thinking about that? Not just employee resource groups from an HR perspective, but enabling your employees, experienced or otherwise, to have that voice, to come up. Some of the best ideas come from our employees, right? How are you creating that culture of accountability and openness to keep people engaged and feel like they're part of the fabric and not just I'm the only one, like Tracy was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, being the only one, quote unquote, is really is so detrimental. Nobody wants that, and that's, you know, kind of to Erin's point earlier, you know, maybe where some of this turnover comes from, if there isn't this sense of belonging. So we are working on it. You know, I will say with every new hire that we make, and you know, the added challenge that, you know, everything now is virtual. So we've probably hired, I don't know, 30, 40 people since the shutdown. And it's going remarkably well based on like sort of scoring process that we have. But, you know, nobody's met, and you don't have the visceral relationship. You don't have the, you know, the osmosis that you learn about the company and where the boundaries are just by, you know, being in like listening to conversation and being in an office space together. So it just blows my mind, you know, what we're doing now in the midst of, you know, this extra challenge, and really wanting to impart a sense of belonging for everyone. You know, everybody who starts has, you know, their hiring manager is required to create a 90-day onboarding program. So with that, they meet a spectrum of kind of cross-functional and direct team members, and start to build relationships. And are assigned kind of a buddy in that program as well. So that allows them to start to kind of query and ask questions and kind of get their feelers about, you know, what is happening here, and where do I sit within this company, and what are my, again, what are the boundaries that I might or might not have. And, you know, you mentioned ERGs. We've built out these affinity groups. We're calling them infinity groups. It's not quite as structured as ERGs. But, you know, we're trying to create a space for everybody. And that, you know, people can determine. It only requires a couple people to start an affinity group, and they get a budget for it. And they can pursue, and, you know, they can pursue their interest inside of the spectrum of that sort of subject matter, and invite more people in. We have a really robust, super cool, it's one of my favorite things I've done at Iterable, is be a part of a mentorship program, which initially was women to women, you know, mentoring. Now we've expanded it to the whole company. It's just, it's sort of a beautiful thing. It's just been so delightful for me to get to know people in a different capacity who I would have not, you know, had these conversations with previously, and hopefully to help a little bit just based on all my years. You know, there's got to be some benefit for all these years.
And the power of mentorship is fierce, right? That's been a common theme with each one of you. And not to cut this off.
My name is Bill Tyndall, and I'm excited to be joined today by Jamie, Chris, and Nate from Iterable.
Okay. So that was kind of like the hook apparently for us. I don't know if MSP did that on purpose or not, but I was just going to say mentorship is something that is part of everything that each one of you have talked about, and we've covered a lot, and clearly time flies when we're having fun. Let's go speed dating, round robin, really quick sound bites here. Erin, one key takeaway from our time together that anyone that's joined us can think about and apply to their business.
I'd say just focus on, I mean, hiring for diversity is one thing, but developing diversity within your organization is another. And it's really important to focus on both those things, and to do it from a lens of why it's better for the business, as well as just the right thing to do.
Tracy, thoughts?
Yeah, be intentional, right? Be really intentional, and be as open to uncomfortable conversations as possible, right? And then it becomes less weird, and then you can actually work on the great advice that, you know, that Erin has given, and others.
Mel, you want to take us home? Oh, Mel's on mute.
Sounds like she can't hear you either.
With her last key takeaway here. Okay. Well, hopefully she'll be able to come off mute to join us. But as we're wrapping this up, this has been a big conversation to have. A very big thank you to all the panelists, to Team MSP for putting us together and showcasing such an important topic.